The rift is widening, not just between the East and West, but in the reporting of facts. After a months-long offensive, Russia's Wagner mercenary group claims to be in full control of Bakhmut in the predominantly Russian-controlled Donetsk Oblast, and they claim they'll formally give it to Russia in the next few days. This battle is of strategic significance to Russia as it gives a stronger foothold in eastern Ukraine, but the battle decimated the mercenary group, and a reported 30,000 Russians were killed in the fighting. However, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has rejected Russia's claims, saying the Ukrainian army still has a base in Bakhmut. Whilst it's impossible to fully confirm either claim, what cannot be denied is that the globe-trotting Zelensky is still receiving strong Western backing, with the US, at the G7 summit in Hiroshima where Zelensky was a guest, promising to train Ukrainian pilots to use F-16 fighter jets. With the West's backing of Ukraine seemingly unrelenting, and Russia's casualties leaving an army of untrained soldiers fighting this heavily backed Ukrainian army, can they survive? Russia may have won the battle for Bakhmut, but does that mean that they will win the war? Is there any chance of a diplomatic end to the war, or will it just be whoever will blink first? What's next in the Russia-Ukraine war?
So let's get to it. What's next for the Russia-Ukraine war? As always, we begin with our quick-fire round, 30 seconds each, to let your initial stance on the matter, and we pick it up from there. So, Yulia Klymenko, please take the lead. Your 30 seconds are on.
The only way out of this war, I think, it's a Ukrainian victory and the Russian Federation leaving Ukrainian territory. This is the only way how the negotiation could start, and peace talks, as all Western countries saying. So there is no possibility of peace talks before Russian troops are on our territory, on our land, at our homes, destroying and killing civilians, first of all.
Yeah.
So that's my answer.
Yeah, we will, of course, continue shortly. Michael, Tracey, your thoughts?
When Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the U.S. Congress in December of 2022, he proclaimed that the Battle of Bakhmut would fundamentally determine the trajectory of the war, just as the Battle of Saratoga had fundamentally dictated the trajectory of the American Revolutionary War. So it was being held up as an extremely important event back then, but it looks like the tactical/strategic significance of this battle is now being framed quite a bit differently.
Yeah, downplaying it maybe. Last but not least, Dan Perry.
Well, I'm frankly amazed at discussion of how the fall of Bakhmut, if indeed it fell, is somehow a turning point in the war. If anything, the fact that Russia had to expend tens of thousands of lives, probably, spent a better part of a year in finally seizing a not very strategic small to mid-sized town in East Ukraine, shows how badly the fight continues to go for them, even though undoubtedly they've made some improvements in air defense and electronic warfare and even some aspects of armored. I think at the end of the day, it's not going so well for Russia.
So let's please feel free to interact from this point onwards, and let's begin from this point exactly. Does the Bakhmut issue change the overall strategic balance of the war, or in other phrasing, is Bakhmut now an empty vessel, so to speak? Is it irrelevant?
Well, why did Zelensky, as I mentioned before, go before the U.S. Congress in one of his most significant addresses since the invasion started, and again proclaim the decisive significance of this particular battle? Was he simply lying then? Was he propagandizing? If so, then what can be trusted that comes out of his mouth? I'm not in a position, nor do I think anybody on this panel, frankly, is in a position to make a definitive judgment as to the precise tactical or strategic significance of this battle. But the changing parameters around which the battle is being framed is a fairly decisive insight into how war propaganda shifts so freely and opportunistically.
I think it goes without saying that the leader of a country at war, especially one who is fighting a rearguard battle and is appeared to be the less powerful side, is going to propagandize. And I wouldn't take very seriously such tactical statements coming out of the mouth of Zelensky. Of course, in trying to build up support for his effort to defend his country, he's going to say stuff like that. Realistically, you would struggle, Michael, to come up with a narrative whereby the fall of Bakhmut is decisive. What would have been decisive is the fall of Kyiv, very far from having happened.
I'm not seeking to come up with such a narrative. I'm not in a position to but there's carnage being wrought for both countries is a catastrophe either way.
Absolutely.
I'm just pointing out that we've been instructed so vehemently since February of 2022 to hold up Zelensky as this oracle of bravery. He's the new Churchill. He's the new he's the latest iteration of the American Revolutionary War spirit, and yet on a dime.
Because I'm closer to Bakhmut. I'm closer to Bakhmut than all of you.
Sure.
Let me tell you that this is not a game, and this is not a computer game. This is live battle. And sometimes today you are keeping city, tomorrow you are going back and enforce. So it's a real war, I can tell you. So there is nothing to keep in Bakhmut, because there is not a single building, residential or non-residential, still not destroyed by Russians and Russian artillery. So there is no sense of keeping burnt land. It's a completely empty city, completely burned and destroyed city, nothing to keep. So what Ukrainian forces doing? They're going and moving and surrounding the city from left and right. So and we will surround it, and we are moving very quickly. So let's see in 1 week what will be the result, and don't judge just because somebody, including, the president, who is telling the truth, I can tell you, but it was in December. Today we have May, and we have completely different picture.
And in this respect, I want us to take a listen to Evgeny Prigozhin, because in the aftermath of Bakhmut, we do need to ask, will Wagner forces get, mud deep in another Bakhmut, so to speak? Let's take a listen and continue from there.
There are no Ukrainian soldiers in Bakhmut because we have stopped taking prisoners. There are a huge number of corpses of Ukrainian soldiers. Bakhmut has been captured completely in its legal borders, down to the last centimetre. Vladimir Alexandrovich Zelensky is lying, or he, like our military leaders, is simply not aware of what is happening on the ground. It could be that. The last person ran across the road about an hour and a half ago in a woman's dress. We shot him dead. We are not taking prisoners.
And in this respect, perhaps two related questions. First, is the Wagner Group Russia's friend or foe, Dan Perry? And also, what Russian gains could actually make a difference at this point, militarily wise?
I made my point, and I agree. People on a panel far away their words are to be taken with a grain of salt. But I do not see how the fall of Bakhmut, a city that, she's right, has, for all appearances, been practically fully destroyed, is going to change anything on the ground. I think there's a bigger narrative here of the Russians struggling to make even relatively small gains and having completely given up any notion of acting not barbarically. Look at what we just heard from the Wagner Force commander on the ground, boasting of shooting someone running across the street dressed in a woman's dress. It's absolutely horrifying. If I was Russian, I would be very, very depressed at what's being done in my name in Ukraine. And the particular ups and downs and back and forth of a battlefield, of course, it's catastrophic and very, very tragic. But at the end of the day, in perspective, it's going to keep on happening. And it seems to make very little difference in a narrative of war that, absent some kind of force majeure, looks like it could last many years, if not a decade.
Each warring party has engaged in a avalanche of demonstrably false and crude war propaganda in support of their own objectives. That's a truism.
Yeah, but one objective is
basically every war.
One of the two objectives is basically unsupportable, realistically.
It's a truism for basically every war, and of course Russia
is not a matter of degree.
In its own crude propaganda to justify the massive expenditure of resources and the massive number of bodies that are piling up on its own side. And likewise with Ukraine, the problem, though, in terms of Western media consumption, is that everything coming out of Ukraine is always portrayed in the most saintly and unblemished possible light. So we can have, just a few months ago, the president of Ukraine, and I would ask the parliamentarian to please comment on this directly. Is she saying that Zelensky in December, when he came to the US for this much celebrated trip, which I'm sure she recalls, addressed the US Congress, pleaded for additional support, likened the Battle of Bakhmut to a turning point of the American Revolutionary War, the Battle of Saratoga? So that was true in December, but all of a sudden isn't true in May. It's impossible to keep track. Yeah, months have elapsed since then, but that doesn't straightforwardly render negated the significance that was attributed to this battle back in December. So when are we to believe what comes out of Zelensky's mouth, and when are we to just chalk it up to propaganda? It doesn't make any real coherent sense.
Look, we are talking about as I said previously, we're talking about real life war. You cannot predict what will happen in 5 months and 6 months. So the war is going on, and people who believe believe speeches of Wagner. Let me remind you, this is a prisoner. The guy Prigozhin, he was in jail. He actually a prisoner, and he is using mercenary for his private army. So this guy will tell the truth. So you do believe that the guy from jail who are using prisoners in the war in Ukraine, and they have already not 30,000 around Bakhmut. Russians lost about 100,000 people. So, and you do believe this guy? No, this is just a prisoner. This guy should be put in prison, and
coming out of the Wagner group.
If I may, Michael, I have to say,
I don't know if it's a propaganda or not. I just don't believe people who were sitting in prison and using prisoners.
Are you listening to what I'm saying?
May I step in just for a second? There is a question of degree, and I find it very dubious to create moral equivalence between Zelensky's obvious hyperbole about this particular town and the war machine and nonstop mountain of propaganda being waged in an aggressive manner by Russia. It's not equivalent.
Okay.
I'm not asserting a moral equivalence either. I'm asserting a comparable level of untruth.
Okay, and on that note, lady, gentlemen, hold your thoughts right there. We'll be right back to unpack the current and future state of affairs in Ukraine. A very short break, and we're back with the summit, so do not go anywhere. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, member of Ukrainian Parliament, Yulia Klymenko, journalist Michael Tracey, and former Europe editor at the Associated Press, Dan Perry. Thank you all so very much for staying with us. We're staying on topic, but before we get back to our conversation, not less important than Bakhmut, some would suggest even more so, Washington revisiting or updating its stance here, greenlighting those F-16. So let's take a listen to President Biden and take it from there.
You know, this morning, I once more shared and assured President Zelensky, together with all G7 members and our allies and partners around the world, that we will not waver. Putin will not break our resolve as he thought he could 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago. We're going to continue to provide economic, humanitarian, and security assistance to Ukraine so it can stand strong as long as it needs it.
So let's get to it. Another quick fire round, 30 seconds each. How unconditional is Western support of Ukraine? Dan Perry, take the lead, please.
A few things Few things in life are truly unconditional, but this case comes pretty close. I mean, even at the height of the war in Yugoslavia, I don't recall a rejection of the Serbian narrative being quite as virulent as is the case here. Now, I can imagine a post-Putin future, for example, where Russia presents a more reasonable, less monstrous stance, and if that is met with Ukrainian maximalism, that, for example, might one day move the needle.
Yulia Klymenko?
Actually, Ukrainian people and nation already decided what they want. 80% want to join the European Union, and the same number after the war increased dramatically wants to join NATO. So West support is essential for us to win and to join this institution. So Ukrainians already said to the whole world and global community they want to be, and they want to be with the West, not with Russia. So I don't think any possibility to turn Ukraine to the Soviet Union.
Yeah. Michael, Tracey, wrap it up for us.
Every ostensible condition that's been placed on U.S. quote-unquote support for Ukraine has fallen by the wayside in short order since this U.S. intervention began in February of 2022. Every weapons system which Biden and administration officials and members of Congress had insisted were a non-starter to send to Ukraine because it would be excessively escalatory has been sent, and the Ukrainian government officials who are lobbying for these disbursements of certain military systems know that the alleged resistance on the part of the U.S. to sending them inevitably wears down to the point of being null, and the escalation continues apace. It's a deceit upon the American people who were told an entirely different set of conditions would apply to this intervention than actually have applied in practice.
So to that point exactly, will the world's most effective fighter jet be effective in concluding the war, or is it just time stalling here?
I mean, the jet could make it easier for Ukraine to, well, first of all, it can be used for attack purposes, and much depends on whether the Ukrainians do. It also provides air cover very effectively, and that will make things more difficult for Russia. But, you know, Russia has, as said, faced great difficulty in this conflict, and it seems pretty clear to me that as long as Putin is around, there's every chance of his being willing to sacrifice 1 million men or 2 million or even more. So I continue to think this war could drag on absent some major externality.
Last weekend,
I would like to jump in.
Go ahead.
Yeah, please, Yulia.
Okay. Okay. So we are hearing, you know, the war started not in 2022. The war in Ukraine started in 2014 with the invasion and the annexation of Crimea and Donbass, or Ukrainian territories. So for us, all these stories of crossing red lines, don't make Putin angry, so don't give them a weapon because Putin will be angry and it will be prolong the war. This is myths and fairy tales. Putin, we believed in for 8 years, waiting that Putin will leave us alone and will not do the full-scale invasion, and believe in these fairy tales that don't touch him, don't make him angry. But unfortunately, this is not the case. So unfortunately, he invaded despite all our, so to say, peaceful behavior. So now we need fighter jets, we need long-range artillery, we need tanks just to push him back from our territory. We're not going to take Moscow or any Russian territory. We just need him to leave us alone and not kill civilians and kids, because with his weapon, he is not fighting against our army. You have to understand it. He is killing civilians, kids, tens of people every day, because the missiles not hitting army, it's hitting civilians, hitting Kyiv, where I'm sitting, my kids sitting in the school in the bomb shelters, you know, and it's for one and a half year. So this is not about winning the war or make Putin cruel or angry. He's already done what he wants and wanted. So at this point of time, we just need to fight him back from our territory. We need to fight him back.
Do you dispute Do you dispute
Can I just say,
that there is Michael, if I may, I'll make it quick.
Go ahead.
Do you dispute, Yulia, that further west there is a legitimate fear that if they get too directly involved in a conflict that, as Michael calls it, is escalatory, Putin might, not getting angry, right? might attack other countries, including countries in the West, and we would have a much more complicated situation on our hands. That's a legitimate fear, is it not?
And can I
answer you very quickly. He has no power to do it, because we are taking all his army and keeping all his army in the front line and saving Europe and other countries. So he will not attack because all missiles on our territory.
Okay, Michael, please.
Okay, about 10 days ago, Zelensky was in Germany meeting with Olaf Scholz, the chancellor, and Zelensky repeated an assurance that he's repeated many times, including to American audiences, over the course of the war, which is that, according to Zelensky, Ukraine will not strike inside Russia. So that's the pledge that's always given, that's attached to their attendant request for additional armament provisions. Just today, there are reports that have been confirmed to CNN by Ukrainian government officials that there's been some sort of land incursion into territorial Russia in Belgorod and elsewhere. I'm sure the parliamentarian whose name escapes me, I apologize,
Yulia
is aware of these reports. Right, and it's been confirmed that these are Ukrainian government incursions, okay? In the leaked classified documents that came out in the US, there were reports of U.S. intercepts on Zelensky himself, where he personally orders attacks inside territorial Russia. So he's just demonstrably telling lies about the willingness or propensity of Ukraine to engage in strikes or other sorts of attacks inside territorial Russia. Now, how is an American audience, sorry to be American-centric, but I happen to be American, and the American taxpayers happen to be on the hook for the largest disbursement of so-called military aid to any country since South Vietnam, okay? So there's a lot on the line here, and the U.S. is deeply, intricately involved in the operations of this war effort. So when the head of the client state who's demanding this incessant support, and when Biden is pledging to continue perpetually the support, is on the record engaging in what are we to make of it? Please explain.
I would, please, Yulia.
Do you have any single proof, not fake news? Do you have any single proof of using by Ukraine Western weapon on the Russian territory, on the Russian territory? Do you have a single?
I'll be happy to provide you with. Yes, I do. I'll be happy to provide you with the classified leaked document that Zelensky confirmed the authenticity of, which showed him ordering strikes inside Russia. I'll be happy to send you the link if you'd like.
I would say that even if you had the proof, it wouldn't really change anything, because when you commit the level of atrocity that Russia is committing upon Ukraine, you're going to potentially face a counterstrike here and there. And I know he promised not to, and I don't care. I don't think Russia.
Does that matter? Or is that just written off?
I don't think Russia should be immune to counterattack. What is absolutely clear is that Ukraine has no claim on Russian territory, and Russia has an enormous claim on Ukrainian territory, if not the entire country.
Yulia Klymenko, Michael Tracey, Dan Perry, it was a pleasure speaking to you tonight. I have a feeling we'll be seeing more of you in the coming weeks. Thank you very much for your time and insight.